all set. The floor is yours.
You're ready. Okay, thanks so much, Isabel, for the introduction. Just basically to explain everyone, the participants, the layout of the talk, of the webinar. I'm in charge of giving the two first pieces that I will talk a little bit on the project structure, and I will show some example of the project results to show how different work package and the cooperation fitted among teams from different countries and continents. And hopefully, if Ian's train arrives in time, he will give the second part of the seminar. The whole purpose is not to talk a lot on the project, but to use the project to give ideas of maybe useful for encouraging cooperation, in this case with China or other countries, and also ideas on the challenge to set up and to run this kind of large cooperative projects. So basically, in a nutshell, what is Shui? In Shui, we have integrated 19 institutions. Most of them are public research or university institutions from Europe, Israel, and China, but we also include two small enterprises, and the idea is to synthesize research being done in both continents and in different types of climates, mostly on to contribute to solutions to water scarcity in agricultural system, but having a close look to soil. I'm not going to read the 19 institutions, you can check it later, but we go from the Mediterranean with partners in Spain to Central Europe, Italy, Israel, UK, and in China, we cover from Hong Kong and Southern and Eastern China to the Northwest. I will talk a little bit on the structure, but it's basically on three layers. One experimental, the other one to take most of model analysis, and the third one will be try to develop specific solutions and guidelines for policymakers. But something that Ian, or I'm afraid myself, will talk in the second part of the presentation is how this project is organized. It's co-funded by the European Union and China because there is a cooperative agreement between the European Union and the Chinese government. In the way that these projects are evaluated and funded, its funding agency funds their partners, the European Union funds the European partners, and the Chinese government funds the Chinese partners. The ratio of funding is the one that you see there. The European, for this kind of projects, the European funding is much higher than the Chinese one. They have a parallel evaluation system. So the whole project was evaluated in Europe, and afterwards, the whole project was evaluated by MOST, the Chinese Ministry of Science and Technology. And in this case, it went smooth because we were approved from both sides, but doesn't need to be like that necessarily. And to make things even easier, the duration of the funding from both sides is different. It's 48 months in Europe, you see the dates there, and the project is finishing at the end of this month. But the duration of the project in the Public Republic of China went for 36 months. So this is one of the challenges and the encouragement for this kind of projects. Who are the Shui people? Well, before COVID, in this project, like anyone else, we have like a critical deadline. It was before and after COVID. This was a meeting in Fuzhou. It was the kickoff meeting from the Chinese side. And it's basically, you see many of the faces that have been involved in the different work package. Before COVID, year 2018 and year 2019, we have a more than serious exchange with visits from Chinese colleagues to Europe and from European colleagues to China. This is a field visit in Fuzhou. This is a seminar that we set it up with the help of Beijing Normal University and Forest University in northern China on hydrologic modeling. This is an example of how we envisioned the project. We were working in science, But most of these kind of projects, science is important, but building bridges and establishing collaboration in the medium and long term is as important as getting neat results. So basically, in the way we work, we started to start the proposal we have been working. One of the foundations of the project was to set up a platform of long-term experiments and the expertise that goes with that, so we can cover different cropping systems in different types of climates. For instance, cereal-based rotations in different places in Europe, from UK to Central Europe, or different tree crop experiments like olives or vineyards, from Israel to southern Spain to Austria, also in some places in China. Try to develop some strategies and solutions for them using the experimental data, and work at two levels. One is farm level. We put in the position of the farmers or the farm manager, and you need some kind of solution. You need a different approach, most of them based on best management practices and rotations, and how to fine-tune small details that are in most cases farm specific. And second, we have tried, and we are still now working hard in the last months of the project in extracting lessons at larger scales. I will explain a little bit more on this. Mainly to orientate policymakers. But again, it's probably, there are many projects on these issues, but there are not many projects trying to bring people, European and Chinese scientists, although UK is leading this part, but it's as important as us is to bring in bridges. Now I'm going to explain how we try to build this project in different work packages in a way that we have redundancy among partners, and it didn't fall off after 1 or 2 years because everyone is on his own. As I told you, the core of the project is the platform of agrosystem observatories. As I told you, we will, 1 or 2 years before applying for the project, we started talking among partners and building this network. So we identify long-term experiments where we could use this long-term experiment, as I say there, at the Swiss lab, because we use this long-term experiment to calibrate and validate the modeling analysis into different work packages, to test or to be inspired by some of the solutions to develop technological solutions in work package 4, and to be also a support for the socioeconomic analysis. We also then, as a training ground for dissemination, and one of the lasting legacy of the projects will be to consolidate the research platform in an open research platform that will be available after the project. On top of that, I told you that this project has a strong component of modeling. And we have a work package 2 in which we approach 2 kinds of different models. One is crop models. We divided this work package into a small sub work package. This may be some hint for people trying to develop similar projects. We decided not to have 2 different work packages because it was a way to force the crop modelers and the people doing hydrologic modeling to work together. I have to say it works quite well, well, quite well, because it's a complicated issue. So we have a work package 2.1, and we basically work with aqua crop, that is the standard model for FAO, and we developed a new version of aqua crop that was the one once to analyze the water use in different cropping systems. And then in work package 2.2, we use different hydrologic models at different scales to evaluate how they could be used to analyze different batch management practices. I will talk to this a little bit later. This work package coordinated with other work packages, particularly work package 3, because work package 2 works at field scale. Field scale in the project may be a single field for a farmer, a hill slope for a plot experiment. This was a work scale. It's basically one of the places where you have the small details and where you make the farm decisions. We use this work package 2 to give hints to the develop of solutions for work package 4 and work package 5. And another issue I will not talk later, but we also explore a fully coupled hydrologic and crop model to take into account the effect not only of runoff, but also the effects of subsurface fluxes of water that can make difference in the optimization of water use at field scale. So that's basically was work package 2. Then we change scale. We have, I have to say that each of these work packages have 2 leaders, one European and one Chinese. So it was another way to reinforce the cooperation. So for work package 1 was the University of Cordoba and China Agricultural University. And in work package 2, they were involved in crop modeling. Sorry, in work package 1, Boku and Northwest Agricultural, work package 2.1, crop modeling, University of Cordoba and China Agricultural University, and for hydrological modeling, Prague Technical University and Changjiang River Scientific Research Institute. For work package 3, we change scale, and we are now go to regional scale. For us, regional scale may be a continent, Europe, for instance, and here the University of Leuven and Beijing Normal University working in this. We try to couple crop model at very large scales. I will show some results so we can make modeling analysis, not being as precise like the one do at field scale, but we need to provide long-term trends and evaluate scenarios. And this is why this model has been very useful. And we use them to analyze regional scale for different climate change conditions or change in water availability. And they have been also very useful to be used in work package 5 and 6 to disseminate our message among stakeholders. So we have basically experiments, we have crop models. Now we have work package 4 that is feeding from the other 3 ones, and that's been run by Agricultural Research Organization from Israel and Hong Kong Baptist University. And the role of work package 4, it's try to integrate all this knowledge into best management practices. This sounds fun, but they will explain now later because it's interesting to integrate this among different disciplines and continents and try to develop different digital tools to help farmers or farm managers to optimize the water use in agricultural systems. And this is what we try to do. We have a strong socioeconomic component here. We have a work package 5 in which 3 of the 19 partners were exclusively focused on this one, plus the support of one small company specialized in water and carbon footprint. And the idea of this work package 5 was to provide an understanding of the cost benefit of some of the solutions that we develop, depending on the kind of farms and the country where we have applied them. Try to provide some guidelines to see how stakeholders see how it's need to be done, the allocation of soil and water resources, and try to evaluate environmental performance of the best management practices in the effect on water and carbon footprint. And they are the guys that they are now trying to develop in the last months of the project, key policy summaries for policymakers. And now we have 2 work packages for people that have been involved for coordinating large cooperative projects. What you always worry is that the projects fall apart. So what we have were 2 work packages, work package 6 and 7, they try to hold everything together. One it was work package 6, led by University of Lancaster and Beijing Forestry University. Usually in a lot of projects, you have these projects in charge of deliver research findings, but we have a strong component of try to coordinate the communication among all the partners and outside of the project. Try to have a common message when we coordinate with local stakeholders, because at the end of the day, because of language barriers, usually are the local partner which coordinates with the national stakeholders, and it's important to maintain a similar message or to get a feedback from different countries so we maintain the message. And we have also, we put a lot of energy and let's say enthusiasm to have a specific module for training the early career scientists that were going to be trained during the project. So that was work package 6. As you see, it's not only about dissemination, it's about having a joint message and try to for us to have communication when we do dissemination of the project among ourselves. And then of course, you have always the work package that always worry that it's overall coordination and management that basically what we try to do in this project is try to have the life easier for everyone. An important thing, because Isabel told me that this is a seminar try to encourage participation in large projects. It's to be aware of identify if any problems arise and change and make corrective actions. Usually it's not a failure that problems arise in a project. It always happens. If you remember that you are running a project for 3 or 4 years, that you started to prepare that project 2 years ago, sometimes you are running with the ideas and the Gantt chart and the programming that you made 4 years ago. A lot of things can happen in 4 years. So corrective actions are not a failure. It's only a symptom when taken properly that the project is alive and the people responsible of making change are on top of that. So don't panic. It's something, it's not going as you planned it 3 years ago and you need to change something. But it's always healthy. And our role was try to help the project to fully exploit the potential. So when there was some gaps, we try to help, particularly in work package 1 and 6. And now I'm going to the second part just to show you some examples of what we did and how that integrate for the cooperation among countries. Work package 1 put a lot of effort on developing. This platform it's a database that it's structured in some way that many different kinds of long-term experiment has been included. So the information is included in a systematic way. Another thing, usually when you try to integrate long-term experiment that were starting by different partners in different times with different, usually it's not a standard way to gather the information. So what we try is to have a systematic way to allow each partner to maintain the data gathering that they were doing, but try to structure that so anyone getting into the database can find it in an easy way and can understand the different classes of information developed. We use that for 2 things. This is an example of the database. So the link is in the web page of the project. We are linked to other projects. If you link to the specific place that we go from China, Southern Spain, Israel, you see a summary example of the project. You have a download to download the data. In almost 90% of this experiment have uploaded all the data that they have. In some cases, like Joal in Austria, because the database is so huge, you have a link to that database. And in the few cases that you don't, for different reasons, the partners do not have the possibility to make fully open all the data, you have a link to the owner of the data. So these data are there to be used. Work package 2, I'm going to rush a little bit to allow time for Ian in case he arrives. One of the things that the Work package 2 teams did was try to use many different hydrologic models like the ones I'm showing here, SWOT, maximise, water shedding, case, the Chinese soil loss equation, and try to see how well or how bad these models are fitted to simulate all the best management practices that we identify, we documented, and we define it in the project. For instance, there are things like vegetated barriers that are integrated in some models, and some other are not capable for doing that. So this is another legacy of the project. As an example of a specific analysis that we made, well, the Chinese and the Czech guys did, I didn't do anything, was to compare using Hydrus, that is a physically based model, the effect of no-till, conventional till, and mulching on different aspects like runoff at the volume, water in the soil profile at the middle of the season, at the end of the cropping season. This is a misspelling. This is runoff generated at the mid of the cropping season and at the end of the cropping season. For different sites, you see places in the Czech Republic, Southern Spain in Cordoba, Austria, Israel, and China. An interesting feature of this, usually no-till in field crops has a change in soil properties, but also impose a mulching because of the residue of the cropping system. What our partners tried to distinguish was the effect on the soil with the effect of the mulching by the cropping system when you do no-till. And basically what they found in green is when you have a systematic positive effect in increasing soil water or decreasing runoff due to the mulching, as compared to no-till, only taking into account the effect on soil properties on conventional tillage. A summary, this is just an example of how Chinese, European, including Israel in Europe, can cooperate. Having this large database, you can identify this trend in which most of the impact of the analysis of these effects of soil management on key soil, water, and runoff variables depends on the ability of having a good mulch. So if we have a no-till and we don't develop a really relevant mulching because we are able to develop a relevant amount of cropping residues, will have a very minor effect on this variable. But as I told you so, it's just an example again of cooperation on a specific issue. We just want to give some highlights on the scale that we mentioned to regional analysis. Another legacy of this project will be that the team at Leuven, that was one of the coordinator of Work Package 3, they took the aquacrop model, that is the FAO reference models, they coded. This is now, it will be freely available for parallel computing at global scale in the NASA repository, and they used to make simulation across Europe, to make simulations how different climates will modify the soil water content in the topsoil, or how will affect the productivity of a given crop, in this case, maize crop Europe. So we developed the tool, we made the analysis at regional scale, but these guys, they also developed the coding and made it freely available. Work Package 5 have two components. One was try to synthesize the best management practices that we identified in the long-term experiment, but also in the expertise of all the partners. A funny thing that many times we don't think is that in different disciplines and in different countries, we use different words for the same soil management practice, and sometimes we use the same word for things that change slightly at field scale. So it's not rocket science, but one of the things we are very happy from this project is that we have a systematic pest management practice for this, made by the same people, and we have a standardized way of call the same pest management practices in Chinese, in English, and we also develop in cooperation with the AEP Agri with an operational group in Spanish. And we will be more than happy if anyone else want to go to another language. They are also another legacy of the project. They are freely available in digital CSIC. As an example of digital tools that we have tried to develop here, one is this. We converted this best management practice into an APP that will be, we are now in the beta testing version, and to be used for two things. One, you will have a summary version of your best management practice in your cell phone. And then if you don't know exactly how to run the impact of the different, depending on what crop and what condition you ask, we have a decision tree. This is in Spanish, to give you an orientation on the best strategy for a given situation. Another example of best management practice, tool for best management practice that we developed, most of the improvement in precision agriculture comes from try to cluster your field in areas where they need a slightly different treatment, for instance, different tree density, or different plant density, or different fertilizer inputs. But how do you cluster your farms? So a strong component, another legacy of the project will be a set of digital applications that will be web-based, where depending on the information that you have, topography, clay content, water accumulation based from topography. We develop, Israeli teams and one company develop algorithm, so you can develop you can cluster your farm in a limited number of homogeneous areas that a farmer can handle, like 3 or 2. This is a 20-hectare catchment in close to Córdoba. And then based on the difference in properties that you can measure, you can identify areas, you can have different treatments. In this case, will be different nutrient inputs. Work Package 5 made many different things, but one of them, like the cost-benefit analysis and the carbon and water footprint. But one of the most interesting things from my view is that this is one of the things that also suffer from COVID, is that they were interviewing in focus group stakeholders from most of the countries participating in the project, and they got their feedback on specific issues to have, which was the situation and the perception of stakeholders depending on a specific possibility for improving water use. As you see here, the approach between China in Greek color, in Israel in the lighter blue, or in Austria, the weight to stakeholders on different techniques change among countries. So you see that groundwater level is a big issue for Austria, while drip irrigation and recycled water is a higher issue in Israel. For Work Package 6, I didn't prepare much because my colleague Ian is supposed to talk a lot on this, but basically we have like 2 sets at first, and this is an interesting lesson from the COVID and the post-COVID world. We have like 2 sets of dissemination program. One was a training program for PhD candidates that was based mostly in exchange among labs and specific courses that were going to take place during the General Assembly meetings of the project. So we will have in-person seminar for the candidates, and we have some of them, like one in Fuzhou and another in Penserkirch in Vienna. But everything changed, and after that we went for digital meetings, webinars, and telematic courses that are all in the web page of the project. And the same happens with the dissemination activities for stakeholders. We have had some field days, like this field day by our Czech partners in the Czech Republic, or this in Córdoba. But again, we have been for 2.5 years of the project going mostly to telematic ways. Now, this was the part of the meeting that I prepared, of this webinar that I prepared, and it's now supposed to be Ian's turn. But before that, I want to thank Isabel and Ian to give me the opportunity to talk here. And well, thank you for your attention and my best wishes for the day.
Thank you so much, José Alfonso. I'm checking if Ian is in the room and I cannot find it. Maybe, Ian, if you are in the room and you are using a different name, just make yourself known and send me a message to the chat box. Meanwhile, I think I have a question for you, José Alfonso.
Okay.
Just is one question that I pose to everyone that comes here to present their collaboration, international collaboration project. Sorry, it's what was first, the idea or the proposal call?
Well, the mature idea was after the proposal call. But before any call, there were some partners that have had exchange with China. So we build on those previous exchanges. So we, for instance, Boku or Lancaster or CSIC, in different ways, we have exchange and collaboration with some Chinese partners. So it's something that we wanted. We were aware that were these cooperative projects, and there were some ongoing projects before this specific course. So we, in a fuzzy way, we were wanting to do something among large with Chinese colleagues. But I have to be honest, you need to see the call to mature the idea, because you you need to go to the point of everything what is written in the call. But it's very good to start establishing cooperation with any excuse.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I asked first because I always pose this question, which was first, but also because I've noticed that you said you started working on the proposal 1 or 2 years before submitting. Yeah. So that was surprising for me, because normally the proposals they appear like just 1 year, something like that.
For that, what I meant is that we were working on reinforcing collaborations. Mm-hmm. So it maybe I have misled, but it's for we were aware that the program existed for different reasons. Several partners, I mean, for instance, Boku or Lancaster has a very long-term relationship with Chinese colleagues. So we were building on reinforcing that. But we got some hints on the proposal, like a bit less than 1 year than submitting the first stage.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. So then I can ask more questions, or do you want to jump directly and take over Ian's presentation, because he's not there? How do you want to solve this?
Well, out of politeness to the attendants, I think that we should try to go to the second part of the presentation. Mm-hmm. And let me try if I can open it in my computer, right? Give me...
Yes. We are still seeing your shared screen, so
yeah, but I'm very bad at this. I need to webinar. I'm opening this.
If necessary, you can share the screen.
Yeah, let me. Yeah. Let's see. Yeah, I cannot show it at full screen. Let's see. Maybe you can show it, right?
Maybe. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen. Okay, you can see it.
I can see, but not full screen.
Yes.
Here we go.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, this is...
okay.
Okay.
I was checking.
That goes. This is for, I mean, for people, we are digging into your question on how long it took for us from the start of the project. The kickoff meeting was in September 2018, since we started. Okay, that gives you an idea. This was a 2-stage proposal. So we were having some talks when we saw the call in September that year. So we set it up a meeting in Prague. Again, another hint, it's always a good thing to meet in person, if possible, particularly if you don't know, if all the partners don't know each other, because you need to streamline the writing. I'm trying to give hints. I don't know if they are useful, but usually when you start writing a proposal with partners that they don't know each other particularly, we tend to write a lot. You just need to exchange ideas. It's more efficient in many cases to exchange ideas, to talk, and just to do the right amount of writing. It's not unusual that the coordinator or the persons try to put together a proposal, ended up with hundreds of pages and comments on the sites. It's basically suck up all the available time. So we try to meet to get a clear idea of what we wanted, and then we prepare the first submission. It was I think it was March. We were approved, and there were 3 projects that passed it to the second stage, and the submission call was in September, and I think that we were approved by early 2018. So that's basically the timeline that we had. But from this point, some of the partners knew each other very well. It goes among Europeans and also some European. Of course, in Europe, we only met the European partners, but it's important to have as much exchange as possible and to talk and try to understand what other one else. So it's the writing is important, but it's the final step, not the first one. Particularly, I think when you write something, when we are changing the proposal or we are drafting or we are adding something, if every partner is asked for 3 pages and includes 7 pages, what is not unusual, you're basically killing the people that are organizing the proposal. Because you are not, you are basically killing their time for thinking in doing administrative work. It's like, so it's any time that we exchange ideas and trying to polish in the beginning, it's a winning strategy. So can you pass the slide, please?
Yes. This one?
So this, we read carefully the call, because one of the things that is always recommended in any project call is that you need to cover all what you are asking and do it in a realistic way. Sometimes you need to make a balance. So you cannot cover everything with the same intensity. So you need to find an equilibrium between covering everything. That is, if you see the project structure I explained to you, you know that we have covered basically all of them, some with more intensity than others. And so we started to have a clear idea of the whole project in the first stage. So when you need to be optimistic and think that you are going to go to the second stage. So you need to have a whole idea of the project since the beginning, even if in the first stage you will need to write, in this case was like 10 pages, for 2 reasons. One is it transpires if you don't have a clear idea of how you are going to develop the project in many of the details when you write a summary of the project. So it's always good to have a clear idea about that. Second, if you go to the second stage and you haven't clarified the basic way on how you are going to structure the project, it's quite complicated to set up that in 3 months. So it's always good to have an overall vision. So that's, go the next slide, please. Why have we developed, why is it a strategic issue for the European Union and China to work in agriculture? Well, today is pretty clear there is a global shortage of grain, but we can attribute now to some of the market situation due to the Ukraine war. What is true in the world, there is a major pressure on increasing food production, while at the same time having a sustainable use of natural resources. China is having a massive increase in research and development. So it now is a major player in research. It has been a major player for some years now. There was a very favorable policy environment between the European Union and China. We face some similar challenge. It's particularly interesting for people like me. I work in soil and water conservation. Soil and water conservation may not be a big issue across all Europe, but for people working in the Mediterranean, we see Chinese colleagues doing very similar research to the one that is interesting to us. So there was a very good reason to join forces between Europe and China. And this cooperative project, I think it was a one of the different ways that both the European institutions and the Chinese government wanted to explore and deepen cooperation. Ian has just arrived, right? So maybe sorry, but Ian is a much better speaker than I am. So it will be a pity that you listen to me while Ian is in the room.
Yes, hello, Jose. Hello, Isabella.
Hey, good to. I'm very happy to see you.
You're doing an excellent job, if I may say so. Do you want to continue sharing the slides, Isabel, and I can take on where Jose left off, if that makes sense?
Yes. Okay. Is it working?
Yes, I can see those fine. Yeah. And you know, as Jose indicated, the fact that China is a major player now with R&D spend, you know, greater than that of the European Union, it makes some sense, I think, for us to collaborate on certain areas, particularly issues like food security that is of paramount importance within China and increasingly within Europe too. So if we could have the next slide, please. So in terms of the initiation of the project, one of the key elements that we needed to do within Europe was to identify prospective project partners. And it's interesting that I think a lot of scientists within the European Union already have collaborators in China. And one thing that was particularly useful to me was the fact that we already had an existing project in China, this Shui Project, where also we were collaborating with CSIC, the National Spanish Research Council, of which Jose works for. So this existing project made it much easier to try and identify prospective partners that we could work with. And moreover, it provided networking events. So Lancaster University has established a joint research institute, Joint Institute of Environmental Research in 2016 at South China Agricultural University with one of their national research institutes. And so, you know, this provided an opportunity for me to actually meet some of the partners that we would be collaborating with within our project quite early in the start of the process towards getting a project together. Okay, next slide, please. So one of the key elements we needed to do as we formulated this project was to have a meeting of minds, and Jose was very good in gathering information to identify key expertise and facilities. So he was great in terms of sending out templates to prospective partners and to gain some understanding of their capacity. And this will probably be a trip down memory lane for you, Jose, looking at some of these images and some of the files that we started preparing our project on. It's interesting that, you know, we've obviously been used to spending, you know, a couple of years working online via the pandemic, but we actually found it really useful to meet together in person. And one of our project partners offered to host a meeting relatively early in the project preparation in Prague. And there we asked our partners to present their research vision and identify certain linkages between the different partners. And you can see here this mind map, or it was actually a PowerPoint slide that I think Jose and others had prepared, showing some of the early linkages that we saw within our project. So if we go to the next slide, please. So then the hard work really starts, actually writing the project. And, again, summarizing information in diagrams, such as the one you can see here, is really useful to make sure that all project partners are on the same page to see how their particular expertise fits within the broader remit of soil and water management, but also what they can offer in terms of unique expertise within the project. So the key elements when you're writing the sort of stage 1 part of the project, which is a 10-page document, mercifully short, but critically important to try and get right. Clearly, you need to indicate why the project is needed now, and that needs to be within a relevant policy context. And gathering information on current statistics and future projections is really important as well, to make sure that you clearly establish why this project is needed. And so, summarizing the concepts and interactions diagrammatically is really important. But probably the most important thing is that you need to convince your audience that your team is the best placed to deliver this particular project. If we could have the next slide, please. So after submitting the sort of stage 1 document, which is about 10 pages of text, there is an evaluation, a screening process by the European Union, and ultimately we were selected to take forward this project. And that's when the hard work really starts, because it's a significantly greater document required at stage 2. I think it was 70 pages in the end, and this is mercifully short now because it's capped, I think, at 70 pages. I know from previous European Union projects that I've been involved with, sometimes that it was more than 100 pages of documentation required. This is where you really clearly need to identify who are going to lead particular work packages for the description of work in the document. And one piece of advice I could offer is try and keep academics out of the policy section. There are a lot of good companies around the world that, or particularly within Europe, that offer great services in terms of trying to write the policy section, because this is the language that they live and breathe. It's not necessarily the sort of technical or scientific expertise language that academics have. And we were very fortunate to have a good company to work with in this part. Most important in terms of basic management, set your deadlines, but interact, particularly between the work package leaders. I guess I was fortunate that I exchanged a lot within our work package leaders team while we were preparing the proposal, even if it was just reading what they had written and trying to edit it to bring it down to the size we required for the document. For me, that was really useful in terms of trying to understand the broader perspectives of the project. So again, this is probably fairly sensible advice to everyone. Early collaboration while you're preparing the project certainly increases the likelihood of success, and it can moreover avoid awkward discussions when your project is actually funded. So next slide, please. So once you have your sort of project on the page, as it were, I think it's very valuable to turn it over to a core writing team of just a few individuals. I think this is really important to make sure your narrative is consistent and to make sure you're getting the most of complementary expertise. And I know there are various online ways in which you can refine your document. For me, personally, I don't find them that helpful. I know they can be great with small teams, and they're ultimately inevitable during a pandemic. But ultimately, I think in-person interactions in the same room can be more efficient. And certainly, having booked out a couple of days in my calendar to actually refine the project, I sort of had a light bulb moment, and I thought, well, why should I be doing this in Lancaster? Most of the core writing team is based in Cordoba, where Jose is working. So I thought, well, I would simply get on a plane and go out there. Unfortunately, the travel connections actually worked. You'll see this image here of someone sleeping underneath an olive tree. So given that my flight was, I think, at 6 o'clock in the morning, by the time I got to Cordoba, I probably did need to sleep under the olive tree. And I think I might have had a power nap later in the day. But for me, I felt better, certainly less confused in terms of version control by actually being in the same room as the others that were making a contribution to refining the project. We had the project pretty much 90% written, but I think the value of that extra 10% is that it just becomes a much more coherent document. And that was very valuable. So I thank Jose for his hospitality and 24 hours of really intense writing or editing activity. I think the next slide is coming up next. And what was quite interesting, ultimately after we were granted the project and the funding, was that we actually set out our research agenda within this article. As I understand it, the editor of the journal approached Jose to write this, and I think this is becoming a little bit more common, that some journals will look at what projects have been funded and actually approach the coordinators and say, would you like to write a sort of perspectives article? I can think of at least 2 cases, including the Shui Project, where we've actually done this. But I think it is useful also because it gives recognition to all those who have put a huge amount of effort into actually writing the various work packages in the project. Okay, can we go to the next slide then? So at this point, I was going to hand over to Jose, but with technology being what it is today, ultimately I wasn't able to do that. Isabel, I'll defer to you now because I realize that we are moving on with time. I've got potentially a lot of other slides I could elaborate on, but perhaps we want to wrap this session up. I'll leave it to your discretion, Isabel, because I think you wanted time for questions. But hopefully we've done this in reverse order in the sense that I've provided the background to the project that Jose has actually described to you.
Well, whatever you prefer. I'm happy to continue with the presentation and finish all what you had envisioned to share, or it would depend on your availability. If you have time to stay, I'm open to it.
Okay, well, we'll go quickly through a few remaining slides.
Yeah,
but
that would be good.
Yeah, I think we'd like to wrap this up in the next 15 minutes or so, if that makes sense with everyone. And I thank you for your patience in allowing me to speak today. So if we could go to the next slide. I guess this is a sort of timeline of our project, and possibly Jose has covered some of these issues as well. Obviously, the last 4 years have been incredibly challenging for many people, and the project, at least from a dissemination and communication perspective, has not worked out as we intended with the intervention of the COVID-19 virus. And so if you look at this timeline, you can see a sort of fairly traditional dissemination and communication plan. We had kickoff meetings in both the EU and China. We had various training courses. And then we moved almost exclusively to an online environment. And it's only later in the project we've had scientific exchanges, field visits again, which has, I think been somewhat a return to normality, but also I think hybrid events that are both in person and online have allowed us to capture, greater interest in the project where people haven't been actually able to be physically there in person. So if we go to the next slide. So in reflecting on the project, I think I'd like to cover a few areas, and that is various models in which we in the European Union can collaborate with China, the value of scientific exchanges, communication, and some future possibilities. So if we go to the next slide. So there's a number of projects that I've been involved with over the years that have had explicitly EU-China collaboration at their heart. Some of these have been unilateral exchanges or funding. Some have been bilateral projects where partners have exchanged in both directions. And then possibly the most complex of all, this joint R&D project of Shui. So I'm just going to briefly go through these different projects just to sort of show you the sort of kinds of projects that ultimately led up to our Shui project funded by the European Union. So if we go to the next slide. So SOREAP was a project that Lancaster and CSIC were involved with 2015 to 2019. I won't read out the name of the title of the project, but you can see how it ultimately led to the acronym SOREAP. And the aim of SOREAP was designed to try and ensure that European scientists actually spent some time doing research in China. And this, I think, was a little bit revolutionary in the sense that, you know, many Chinese researchers have come to various European Union countries, but ultimately this was funding to have a sort of reciprocal visit, in the sense that it allowed European scientists to spend an extended period of time in China. I think you've got your hand up, Jose.
Yeah. No, it was a mistake.
Okay.
Sorry.
That's fine.
It's been a messy morning. Yeah.
Okay, sure. So, I mean, this was based on bilateral long-term relationships that already existed. So we chose to work specifically with Chinese institutions that we already knew and where possibly their academics had actually done their PhDs in European institutions. And I think this was really valuable to ensure, I guess, a cultural calibration, that if we were going to send European students and postdocs to Chinese universities, which was a condition of the funding, we wanted to make sure that our Chinese partners had a good understanding of European research culture, given that they'd already been immersed in that. I think the project had a number of successes, but the successes largely depended on the success of the visitor and host engagement. What we found was useful was that we had a cohort of early career researchers in China, and this helped in terms of providing a network to allow them to help adjust culturally and try and pool resources to solve any problems. But what was most critical was that their funding was actually linked to the time that they had in China. And, you know, I sort of would certainly like to pay tribute to those researchers who accepted a very non-traditional funding model to undertake their PhDs. Typically, they spent 6 months or more at Lancaster or various research institutes in CSIC before they went to China for a period of 18 to 24 months, and then they returned to Europe to write up their PhDs. And you know, the project was very successful in the sense that a large number of students, developed good working relationships with their group in China, and ultimately graduated with PhDs from their home institution within the European Union. We didn't dabble in the idea of joint degrees. We could have the next slide, please. So another model of funding that my own group has taken advantage of is a Newton Advanced Fellowship, which is actually still ongoing, a very specific technical title looking at soil adherence to roots or riser sheath formation and crop drought tolerance. And here we were assessed on the complementarity of the relationship. So I'm not a molecular biologist. I would call myself an agronomist or crop scientist. But the other group that I was collaborating with has got good molecular biology expertise. And the aim here was to try and allow the two groups to acquire new research skills to allow new project directions. The limitation on the funding was that you could spend no more than 3 months in each site in each year. And that it was kind of one-sided in the sense that I hosted Chinese visitors for up to 3 months. I would spend about a few days or up to a week in China each year. And you know what we found was that with a large number of researchers from China coming to the UK sequentially over the years, that you got variable level of engagement according to the skills, expertise and motivation of the individuals that travel to Lancaster. But this project has been successful, I think, in terms of publishing papers, but also allowing us to explore an area of research that was complementary to my own, that otherwise I wouldn't have actually been involved in. So if we could have the next slide. And this brings us to the Shui Project, which again, I think has been successful by allowing us to exploit existing, but also to form new bilateral relationships. I think one of the challenges, and perhaps Jose's already talked about this, is that it has been very much business as usual for our Chinese researchers. If this has only been a supplement to their existing funding that has provided travel and subsistence to their groups. Now, during a pandemic, the possibilities to actually spend that funding on travel and subsistence have been largely limited. So whereas, we did have Chinese scientists at the kickoff meeting in Cordoba, and clearly we had a very fruitful meeting about 6 months into the project when we went to Fuzhou in China. Once the pandemic hit, naturally enough, there's been less active engagement. And whereas it has been useful that we've been exploiting online platforms such as this to discuss our work, I think there's always a tendency with online working that the engagement is much more passive. One thing that I think has been perhaps a disappointment, but understandable given the circumstances of the pandemic, is there have been relatively few research exchanges, both within Europe, but also between the European Union and China. And those few that Chinese scientists have made it to Europe over the last 4 years have generally been funded by other sources rather than our project, even if they've worked specifically on the Shui Project. So if we go to the next slide, please. So I'd just like to pay tribute to a couple of Chinese PhD students that were able to, once they had their vaccinations, actually travel to the UK and do some work related to partial root zone drying irrigation and riser sheath formation of rice within my laboratory. And this has been really useful, I think, in terms of developing, both in terms of developing their research skills, but also getting a perspective of what it's like to work in a UK university, particularly on topics that are relevant within our Shui project. And they've returned to China now, and generally they found it a very beneficial experience being in the UK. And it's just unfortunate that we weren't able to do more of this within the Shui project because of travel restrictions. So if we could have the next slide, please. So, communication is paramount in these, large multidisciplinary projects. And language difficulties can inhibit genuine collaboration. I guess we've been fortunate within the project that we've often worked with highly motivated Chinese early career researchers for whom language difficulties are less of a problem than some of their peers that are more my age. One challenge we've had is this interoperability of our project websites, which we've tried to address by basically having a mirror site within China. It's interesting that when European scientists go to China to visit laboratories or give a lecture, you typically attract a very large crowd. Obviously, that hasn't been possible recently, but we've found that online training environments can enhance participation, and particularly if the events are recorded, as I understand this one is. It's not just limited to who can attend the meeting in person or who can attend at the specific time zone that the meeting actually is. And this can be a problem that challenges all of us. I'd still argue that no matter what we can do in online environments, there's still very much a role for bespoke in-person and technical training, particularly in relation to advanced instrumentation. So if we go to the next slide. With the easing of restrictions in the UK, finally, we were able to have workshops in person again. And this was a workshop that I hosted at Lancaster, where our visiting speaker was from Delta T Devices. So a nice collaboration between academia and industry. And these were the learning objectives that we set our students, which we had to limit to 12. That was the maximum number of people we were allowed in the room based on our institution's requirements for COVID safety. And this was great because Tony Pillow from Delta T Devices was able to train a number of us in both the theory and the practice of various instruments that his company manufactures. Now, clearly, you know, for people like myself, I've got a reasonably good understanding of a lot of the instruments. But for our new Chinese PhD students that arrived in the lab, this was a great training opportunity because it allowed them immediately to get up to speed with the instruments that they'd have available to them within my laboratory. And what was really interesting was that in discussing with my Chinese PhD students that were visiting after this event, they said, well, we wouldn't have this opportunity if we were in China. An event like this would typically take, you know, would attract about 50 students, okay? And we would have the opportunity to have the equipment demonstrated to us, but not allow us to actually hands-on work with the equipment. So I think this has been quite interesting that given many Chinese institutions have significantly more students than, say, some European institutions, it does provide the opportunity for this bespoke hands-on training, which I still see as being really valuable. You know, even if we've produced instructional videos during the pandemic that you can see on the Shui website about utilising some of this instrumentation, there's still, in my view, no replacement for hands-on training courses where you can actually discuss with those that are expert in using these instruments. Okay, if we could have the next slide. So, I mean, in terms of future possibilities, I think it's been a valuable learning process. Any new project is. I think possibly some of the challenges we've faced within the Shui project have been somewhat unique. Perhaps those that had research in the early 1900s after the First World War, where there was something rather erroneously named as Spanish flu. Maybe they suffered these challenges as well, but I suspect academic mobility may not have been as great then as it is now. But in terms of looking to the future, for me, one of the challenges has been in terms of leveraging EU-China collaboration is that the projects our project has received funding from two sources, and the duration of the funding has been different in the sense that we've received 4 years of funding from the European Union. Our Chinese partners have had to apply for a project that is only run for 3 years. Allied to the pandemic, I don't think we've managed to achieve the level of collaboration that we might have hoped for, particularly when we were hoping for new relationships to form and new elements of research to occur as a result of collaboration within this project. I think, you know, looking for the future, one thing we want to try and ensure is that there is an element of funding retained that for flexible and competitively awarded funding to allow bilateral mobility within projects such as this. Yes, we've had some research exchanges, but I think if we're really going to be serious about more deeper involvement in terms of EU-China collaboration, that needs to be embedded within the project. I guess the other element that, you know, is probably common to a lot of projects is just having greater awareness and perhaps alignment of funder expectations. What's become quite clear is that as far as our Chinese partners are concerned, their funding from the Ministry of Science and Technology is very much focused on publications, okay? And I can remember when I was in China while we were formulating the project, attending a fantastic presentation from one of our respective partners about all of the great work they were doing in terms of the impact of different tillage regimes on crop growth. And I said to them, well, this is great. Now, how often do you talk to the farmers about the work that you're doing? And the response was, we haven't talked to the farmers yet. And, you know, that was, you know, a great surprise to me. And what's been quite important within this project is that as far as the European Union is concerned, it's not just about the publications, although I would argue that this has been a successful project from that perspective, but also about achieving impact. And I think this is where European Union and Chinese researchers can learn from each other to a large extent. I know that some of my Chinese colleagues have specifically had 2 weeks embedded in their academic timetable where they actually go to villages and exchange directly with farmers. Likewise, in some institutions in China, this hasn't necessarily been the case as reflected in my previous anecdote. And I think this is where we need to learn from each other in terms of our expectations and around publications and impact, because I think there is still a lot of promise in working in China, particularly because if you can collaborate effectively with your colleagues in China, there's an opportunity to have much greater impact of the research that you're doing. In the European Union, if we reach 50, 100 farmers, we think we've been reasonably successful in terms of dissemination. Certainly, I know from some of my Chinese colleagues, they're looking at reaching 500, 1,000, 5,000 farmers over the course of their academic careers. And this is, I think, an ambition that we should have, because ultimately it's the translation of the research that we're doing via the actions with training farmers, training agronomic consultants, where we're going to leverage real benefits of projects such as Shui. And I think that concludes what I wanted to say, and I hope that's been useful to everyone.
It was useful. So as you said, as you promised, it was 15 minutes past. So I'm going to let the attendees pose some questions if they have. So for that, they have different methods in order to ask. They can use either the chat. They can use the feature for questions and answers that it's in the toolbar in your Zoom, or if you are not shy, you can raise your hand and I will give you the floor to pose your question with your microphone. So let's see if we receive any questions. And in the meantime, we are past our time, as you know, so I have a lot of questions that probably I won't be able to ask you. So I will just select one that is about, it was something that José Alfonso said during his part of the presentation about project implementation and management. And you spoke about redundancy in implementing the task about different members of the consortium, and also redundancy in leadership, because there were 2 leaders per work package, as I understood. Can you expand a little on that and just say how did you manage, how the coordination team managed to have this redundancy doesn't kill itself?
Well,
or
yeah.
and if you would advise this for projects that are not like Shui, that you have to coordinate many people in different regions.
Well, it's regarding redundancy. An important issue sometimes is that you have partners with different skills, and some of them they need to develop only some skills in the project, but it's a pretty bad idea to have only one partner that have the skills to do something, because if that partner fails, you basically are on your own. So imagine if we are doing something very specific on soil and water conservation, you have a leader on that issue, but you have several partners that have good skills on that. So you need to rearrange, to reallocate workforces. That's an issue. Mm-hmm. To prevent what you say, that you kill each other, is that, I mean, since the beginning of the proposal, it's very clear that what some people has to do.
Mm-hmm.
Even if they would like to do something else, you try to, I mean, at the end of the day, this is teamwork. So if some people try to contribute something else, you shouldn't stop them. But it's very important to make sure that when you are in a project, that redundancy is basically an insurance, but it's not a check to do whatever you like once you have got the project. And I think that you need left hand. I don't know very well how to do it. You basically deal with the problems individually, but probably Ian has also some say on that.
Yeah, I think that's a great managerial response, Jose, and I certainly subscribe to what you say. I guess I've always been rather more opportunistic in terms of trying to ensure redundancy in a project. And I think it's very important for all partners at the beginning of the project to set out their stall in terms of indicating what their key expertise is, what techniques they plan to use within the project, but more importantly, trying to motivate others within the project that your particular element of work that you're proposing to do within the project is really excited, and everyone else should jump on board and enjoy the ride with you that you're going to take throughout the project. And I think this provides a way of trying to build in additional redundancy to what you do from a managerial perspective within the project. And I think we've seen some great examples of this within the Shui project, particularly related to precision agricultural techniques. So yes, there's a number of sites that we have within the project that are collecting spatial data. And what Alon Bengal and Aviva Peters in Israel have done very successfully, I think, is talk to a lot of our partners within the European Union about the tools that they're developing. And we've seen a lot of cases, I think, where they've worked with spatial data collected at sites in Spain, in the Czech Republic, possibly in Austria as well. And I'm not sure that all of that was envisioned within the project when we started. Certainly, they had intended to collect this spatial data in their own vineyards within Israel, but also as a result of the collaboration with Spanish researchers and Czech researchers particularly, they've added to what they had hoped to deliver by collaboration. And I think this is where, building redundancy into a project can be enhanced by collaboration.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for your answer. I don't see any questions in either the chat or the question tool. So we are 20 minutes past time. So I'm going to wrap up for, if you agree, wrap up for today. Thank you so much, José Alfonso and Ian, for being today with us to present Shui and how was the whole journey from the very beginning and before the proposal writing even until the very end, because I understand that the project finishes this month, so in 1 week. So 1 week will be over. Yeah. So
if I could say, I hope this hasn't been too disjointed. I've had some severe technical difficulties joining the meeting today, but hopefully that what I said was reasonably coherent with what Jose said, and I'll look forward to seeing the recording later this evening, perhaps. And I can catch up with the first part of the seminar.
Yeah, I will try. I think I will upload this in the YouTube channel tomorrow morning. So you definitely will have it tomorrow in the afternoon in order to rewatch it, review it.
I think it's also quite interesting because that way you get two perspectives of the same project from two different people, because the reality is we all come to these projects with different ideas, and that's part of the advantage of working in large projects such as Shui, that you do get a lot of additional expertise by working with colleagues that work in different disciplines, and that's certainly I've learned a lot from this project.
Mm-hmm. I agree. It's not just an advantage, but it's an adventure, I would say. So thank you so much. Just we have a comment from Gunther. Thanks, Jose and Ian. That was very interesting. Thank you, Gunther, for being here. And thank you all for staying until the end, and see you soon for our next webinar. I would advise you to keep tune in into our social media channels, because we will start advertising the next webinar that will happen probably, I think it was in the 20th of September. Just check us in our Twitter account on our page, and you will be kept updated. So thank you so much, and that's all.
Okay. Bye bye, guys. Cheers.
Great to see you all eventually.
Yeah.